Mike Card, welcome to Apollos Watered.
Good morning, Travis. How you doing?
Doing really good. Where are you at right now?
I'm home.
You're home, and that is in Franklin, Tennessee.
Well, it's actually Fernvale, Tennessee, which is even farther out.
Wow. Okay, yeah. Good. All right. Well, we have, first of all, to get to know you a little bit more, which a lot of people know a lot about you. You've been in the music industry for some time, written several different books, but let's probe a little bit deeper. Are you ready for the Fast Five?
I think so. We'll see. We won't know until it's too late. So go ahead.
Okay, here we go. Now, you are in farm country right now.
Yes.
That a lot of people don't know. So here we go. IH or John Deere?
Kubota. Sorry, buddy.
Kubota.
Yeah.
Wow. Which is what color?
Huh?
What color is that?
They're orange, but they're actually made in Gainesville, Georgia. Okay.
Interesting.
So, the tractor we have is a Kubota, and it's the Rolls Royce of tractors.
Rolls Royce of tractors.
It's a great tractor. 3901. That's the model you want.
3901. You know, my father actually was a tractor puller.
Oh, wow.
Back in the day. Yeah. Back in the day.
It cost more than my car. I'll just say that.
Well, I always laugh when people think about that for farmers, because I mean, a combine is like hundreds, it's so much money.
Yeah. The farmers are the first people to hurt when the economy gets bad, and they're the last people to recover.
Yeah.
And so we should be supporting farmers much, much more than we do.
Amen and amen to that. Okay. So a Kubota. So you totally took me off on that one. All right. Now we know that you are a Bible teacher, but here we go. Old Testament or New Testament?
New Testament, Gospels.
Really?
Yeah. But you can't understand the Gospels unless you understand the Old Testament. It's hard to just say, one or the other, but I spend most of my time now in the Gospels.
That's pretty encouraging, but it was almost a Jesus answer where you're like, well, the New Testament, but we need the Old Testament.
Well, when John the Baptist says, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, if you haven't read Exodus, you have no idea what he's talking about. So
totally agree on that.
They're too integrated. They're too woven together.
Okay, here we go. I agree. But let's get back to our questions, because I want to pause on that and come back to it, because I know you have so much to say on that.
Right.
But you traveled a lot of places. You've met a lot of people. Mm-hmm. What is this weirdest food you have ever eaten?
I ate a scorpion in China one time. I think that's about as weird as it gets.
Was it cooked? Please tell me it was cooked.
It was in deep fat fried. It tastes like potato chips.
Really?
Yeah, but I just did that. It was all based on a dare, food that's based on a dare. And then I ate pig knuckles in Korea one time. That was pretty gross. So, but I think it's hard to top a scorpion.
I had Scott Moreau, who's the academic dean at Wheaton Graduate School, and I asked him that question, and he said fermented mare's milk.
Ooh,
and I was like, okay. And then Nick Ripken mentioned that he ate flies off the front of a car. I was like, all right.
Wow. Was he sober when he did that? That sounds like something some person would do.
All right. Now here's another one. You've already talked about this a bit, but just stay with me because you're talking about a tractor, but I want to bring this back. If you were a mode of transportation, what mode of transportation would you be and why? I know it's a weird question, but just go with it.
No, I'd be a Ducati motorcycle.
Really? Why?
Yeah. Well, I rode motorcycles for a long time, and I just think it's like a rocket, and it's like a spaceship, but it's also a motorcycle. It gets 60 miles a gallon. They're cool. They're practical. And it's just all those things wrapped together. My wife sort of said, okay, when I turned 60, you said you're too old for that. So on advice of counsel, I got rid of my Ducati, but I sure do miss it.
I had no idea that you were a motorcycle guy.
I was. Now I'm just an old man who drives tractors and grows flowers.
Okay. Now you said you've been to China, Korea. What is the strangest or funniest cross-cultural experience you have had?
Oh gosh.
It doesn't have to be overseas either.
Oh, That's a hard one. I think the weirdest thing I remember, I think I was in Korea, and a woman was trying to speak to me in English, but it came out really inappropriately. What she said, so inappropriate that I can't even tell you what it was. But I knew that she didn't mean that. It was those kind of things. She used a couple of words that she, I don't know where that was the weirdest thing, to the sweet Christian lady to say these things to me, and I'm kind of, yeah,
That's
that
funny.
was pretty. That was pretty weird. That was pretty weird.
There's a website. My brother-in-law was an ESL teacher for many, many years, and he told us about a website called
Oh, that's
English.com.
cool. Well, I was with ELIC, English Language Institute in China. I was with
Okay.
them when it happened. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well, I mean, but in this website called English.com, it's all these funny translation things and
Yeah.
photos, and
It
it's
was one of those things.
oh, it's so funny. If you want to laugh, go to that, English.com. Okay. Now we know that you are a Bible teacher. You are a thinker with the soul of a poet. You've written songs that have been both popular in a moment and have endured. I mean, written articles and books, and through it all, you've not chased trends. That's one of the things that I've really admired about you through the years. But it seems that you've always sought to help people think deeply and reflect on the depths of who God is and what he has done for us. And what was it that formed your approach to really thinking and writing as a Christian?
Well, that's the easiest answer. I am the product. I mean, as much as one person can owe another person, I owe William Lane, Dr. William Lane.
Mm-hmm.
I did undergraduate and graduate work with him. He discipled me for about 26 years. He talked my wife into marrying me. She didn't want to. He talked her into it, and then he married us. And I was
That's
holding
a good man.
I was holding his hand when he died.
Oh.
Yeah. So Bill, my wife is named Susan, and Bill, this is it. She was just graduating from nursing school, and I was finishing my master's, and had been just sort of dogging her for 6 years, and she wouldn't have anything to do with me. And Bill corners her and says, Mike really loves you. And she says, well, I just don't love him, And this is how he turned her around. He said, well, Susan, of all the men you've known, who have you trusted? And she said, I think I trust Mike. And he said, this is the line that got me with my wife. He said, Susan, it's more important to say I trust you than to say I love you. And her mind started changing. I mean, didn't get her, she didn't, repent right away and come over into the Holy Land, but she eventually did. And yeah, so that was Bill Lane, PhD, Harvard. He wrote the New International Commentary to Mark and the 2-volume Word Biblical Commentary to Hebrews. He was brilliant, brilliant man.
Wow.
But he's the reason. I would have never written music if it wasn't for Bill. I went to the church, which was a biracial church that he gave leadership to. So he got me into reconciliation. One day he said, "You play the guitar, don't you, Mr. Card?" And I said, "Well, yeah, but that's really for attracting girls at the student center. That's what guitars are for." And he said, "Well, here's my sermon for next week. Write us a chorus." And it was John 21, second miraculous catch of fish. And so Stranger on the Shore was the first song I think I ever wrote for Bill. And I would play them and he would do a sermon. We did that for 6 years.
How old were you?
It's all Bill Lane.
But how old were you when he did that for you?
About 19.
Wow.
Yeah.
I
got a picture of him here someplace. I can show you. Well, I can't find it. Yeah.
What were your plans before that? I mean, have you thought what you were going to do?
Yeah, I was in forestry. I was a forestry major, and my one criterion was that a job not involve people. I wanted to do bird counts for the Forestry Service.
Really?
So that was my major. Yeah, I'd grown up in going to East Tennessee and staying in the Smokies in the summer and hiking. That was my world. And I had to take a humanities class. And I was a Christian. I was a Jesus freak, but I was a kind of a loner, a loner Jesus freak that didn't want to have anything to do with people. And I took his class in New Testament. And as a conservative, I grew up Southern Baptist, very conservative. Both my grandfathers were Baptist preachers. I took this class, and I was taught that people like Bill were the enemy. A Harvard PhD in New Testament, he's going to tear the New Testament, tear your faith apart and leave you there to, put it back together again. And so he walks into this classroom in this secular Western Kentucky University, secular school, and he sits on the corner of his desk and he said, my name is William Lane, and all you need to know about me is I'm a man under the authority of God's word. And my mouth fell open and I said, I want to be that guy. And so I took every class for 6 years. I took every class that he offered, and we became very close friends. Like I said, he had pancreatic cancer. You mentioned earlier someone who had it. And he called me from Seattle where he was living. And he said, they've given me 6 months to live. I don't want to die here. I have no collegiality. He said, can I come to Franklin and show you how a Christian man dies? So he moved here and he lived 18 months. But I was holding his hand when he died. So as much as one person can owe another person, I owe William Lane.
There was another man that you mentioned in your podcast recently who also died of pancreatic cancer. And he said that because you said I would take it from you.
And that's Denny Denson. Denny is one of the church. When you talk about the reconciliation movement here in Franklin, Denny was really the leader. Denny had been a Black Panther and very sort of angry, and he hated white people. He still, I think, struggled with liking some of us. Denny was was in our group and had, he was my best friend. And so Denny's laying in bed dying of pancreatic cancer. And I'm like, brother, I'm crying, brother, I would take this. If there's any way I could take this from you, I would take this from you. And Denny looks at me and goes, you couldn't handle this. And he's probably true. I mean, he's probably right. But Denny Denson, boy, he was something else. He was something else. Yeah. He said, Jesus had taken off the garment of violence and clothed him with the garment of grace. But he was the guy you wanted on your side. Boy, he was a great man. Denny Denson. Oh, he's a cool Denny Denson story. Everybody knew Denny as R.L. Denson. Okay, R.L. Denson. So I'm at his house one day and we're just hanging out, and he had been in Vietnam, and he showed me his honorable discharge papers, and there was the name Rufus Levon Denson. So I found out what RL stood for, and as soon as I saw that and smiled, he knew, Roof. So I started calling him Roof, and he did not like that. I mean, he would say, "I will never stop killing you." RL Denson.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about racial reconciliation, because you have that on your website. That's something that's near and dear to your heart. Describe that process of how you got involved in that, and what is that neighborhood renewal that you've been talking about and you've laid out on your website?
Well, I grew up in the 60s and 70s in Nashville. I can remember barely white-only drinking fountains downtown Nashville. I can remember going to the movies. My grandfather, who was a pastor, was a fought for reconciliation. He integrated his church in the 1930s. So I kind of come from a line of reconcilers. My mother, who was his daughter, just raised me. She hammered that. My father, on the other hand, was a person who struggled with prejudice. So I grew up in this weird world. So then I met Bill, and again, I was prepped to enter that world with him. He was giving leadership to a Black church in Cecilia Memorial Presbyterian Church in Bowling Green, Kentucky, a church that had been built by slaves after the Civil War. Bill was given leadership there, 25 elderly members. And then once Bill started, all of his grad students started coming. So I was there for 6 years. And a lot of the people who, besides Bill, who encouraged me in terms of songwriting and it had input on my songs were elderly members from that community. So, and then lo and behold, my best friend is a guy named Scott Rowley. And Scott is a person who started the Franklin Table and works for reconciliation and neighborhood renewal. He's the guy that got me into neighborhood renewal. Basically, I have just sort of held people's coattails. I sort of followed Bill and what he was doing. And then I followed Scott and what he was doing and always kind of tried to make myself available. And for me, and I got this from Denny, because, I'd ask Denny, okay, you tell me what to do. And Denny would say, open the door of your life to someone who's not like you. How about that? Right? It's not complicated. And so, and basically, I try to build relationships. And I've always experienced more grace coming towards me than from me. And I have, several friends that would do anything for me. And so that's what it looks like for me.
Which is really a phenomenal thing. And it's encouraging to hear that, because a lot of people, when they just think of musicians, they don't think of all of the different things that they're involved in their lives. And one of the things that you've really gone out of your way to do and show is that in many ways you've been more of a Bible teacher, and that is what your music has come out of that in many ways, or the other way around. What's a project that you're working on now? Because you just released a new book, The Nazarene, 40 Devotions on the Lyrical Life of Jesus, but you're always working on a project. Have you moved on from that already, or what is that book about?
Yeah, no, that I'd written 4 albums on the Gospels, and basically the Nazarene is essays on each one of those songs. So it goes with the last 4 CDs. After that, I wrote one more CD on the Hebrew word Hesed. I wrote a book on Hesed, and that's going to be my last CD unless God audibly starts giving me songs again. I think that it's been a long season. I've written 450 songs. I think that's kind of enough. And so what I'm focusing on for the rest of the time that God gives me is the details of the life of Jesus. I was in Jerusalem last year and 2 years ago, and there's a rabbi there that I've gotten to be pretty good friends with, and I'm trying to impress him with my knowledge of Judaism, which is kind of a stupid thing to do to a rabbi, but I do lots of stupid things. And so anyway, Moshe is his name. And I'm saying, the pilgrimage feast, there's 3 feasts in Judaism that you're supposed to go to Jerusalem to celebrate at one point in your life. And I said, that Jesus, even though he lived in Galilee for the most part, he went to those 3 feasts, as far as we know. That's 100 miles. And I'm just trying to impress him. And this rabbi says, yeah, but what does that mean? I said, what do you mean? What does it mean that he did that? And I said, I don't know. You tell me. And he said, well, it means that Jesus spends 3 months out of every year walking back and forth to Jerusalem. And that completely blew my mind. And so this man taught me the principle that you know facts, but then you have to learn to ask what the facts mean. And so what I'm in the process now, and I can show you, I've got 3 notebooks this size, Life of Jesus articles. Wow. Okay. And over next to my desk are about 50 books on the life of Jesus. I'm going through every detail of his life and going through this process of what does it mean? What does it mean that Judas kissed Jesus? Other than the fact that Judas is a bad guy, it means that Jesus is unrecognizable and he has to be pointed out. He looks just like the rest of them. He's scruffy looking. One of the most ancient descriptions we have of Jesus, he's described as looking scruffy, which I kind of like. But he looks like everyone else. So that's what I'm doing now. And I'm really excited about this book. I just I just started the introduction a couple of days ago, and the introduction is about the fact that we know Jesus in a way that we know no other person. I mean, think about
Hmm.
that.
Historically, yeah.
Right. We know him historically, but we also know if you know him spiritually, you know,
Yep.
you have his spirit living in you. And then just this morning, I realized, well, guess what? Jesus knows me in a way that no one else knows me. So, you
Mm.
know, it's just the wheels are turning, but the details of his life. I've just read tons and tons of details about the Galilean Judaism of Jesus, which is so different than Judean Judaism, and how much friction you see. It's you see it in the Gospels, how much friction you see between the people who come up from Judea, usually to investigate what he's doing, and then the Galilean Jewishness, what that meant, sort of very looked down upon by the people from the South, the Judeans. So,
What would be a
it's just that
what
kind
would
of
be a
stuff. Really interesting.
what would be a modern equivalent, like a modern American equivalent?
Well, for me as a Southerner, it's the difference between living in the South and living in the North. It's not as bad as it used to be, but there's this perception that Southerners are just sort of second-class citizens and not too bright. We have a
Mhm.
recognizable accent. Jesus speaks with a recognizable accent that makes him sound uneducated.
Mm.
And you see that later on in Acts with Peter. You know, when he's being investigated
Right.
by the Sanhedrin, they say, well, we can tell you're from Galilee. There are certain syllables that Jesus can't pronounce. Like, you know, the Hebrew letter shin, right? If there's a dot over it, it's sh. And if there's not a dot, it's sa. Well, Jesus doesn't differentiate between those two things when he says word that has that letter in it. That's the only concrete one I can find yet. I've done a lot of work on that to see just exactly what his accent is like. But he has a Galilean accent. Galilean Judaism is looked upon as being lax by the people in the South. Galileans in general, some people think that most of the occurrences of the word Galilean in the New Testament should be translated rebel. It really means rebel. It doesn't mean, it's not a reference. I don't totally agree with this, but it's not a reference so much as a place you live or you come from as the sort of people you come from.
Kind of like born on the other side of the tracks.
Exactly. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
type of
Yeah.
expression. And that
Yeah. Well,
brings it up.
some people would say Southern, if you're a Southerner, that means you're a rebel. That's
Yeah.
kind of synonymous.
Well,
So it really is interesting parallel. It's not exact, but there's a fascinating book. It's called The Galilean Jewishness of Jesus. I've got it over there somewhere. Anyway, yeah, interesting.
well, I love that stuff because it's the details that really bring out the story that I
Yeah,
think that we don't realize in our modern culture today. When a lot of Christians hear the scripture, they just kind of gloss over. But these
right.
are people that we have all these cultural nuances that are, as we say, when people talk about culture, it's like talking to a fish in water. And you
Yeah,
say, "How's the water?" And the fish is like, "What water?" You know,
yeah. That's
it's the cultural world. My wife and I got into a discussion about that the other day. We're talking about just the culture determines a lot what we see.
yep,
And when we step out of our cultures, we are able then to see details that we couldn't otherwise see.
yep.
And so you talk about that and you're working on this project now where you're talking about the voice of the gospels or the voice of Jesus in the gospels. Help me out and describe to me what it is you're
Well,
studying right now.
well, part of the sort of background for this thing on the details of Jesus' life is what I call understanding the voices of the gospel writers, the uniquenesses of each one. And most people, you got the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And what I don't know about you, but what I was basically taught was they're basically same outline, pretty much the same content. Then you get to John, 92% unique. See, John's really different. Well, that's not exactly right because
Right, right.
Matthew, Mark, and Luke they have different emphases, they have different
Mhm.
vocabulary, and the way I say it, Travis, is that they're interested in different things, different
Oh
aspects
yeah.
about Jesus' life. Mark is very interested in Jesus' emotional life, and I think Mark, it's pretty standard idea that Mark is being Peter's disciple. Peter calls Mark my son. That the Gospel of Mark is basically the remembrances of Peter. And if that's true, and I think that's a good idea, I wouldn't be dogmatic about it because the Bible doesn't just explicitly say that. And you should, quote Bill Lane here, never be dogmatic about what the Bible's not dogmatic about.
That's a good rule.
Yeah, it's a great rule. But, so you ask yourself, why is Mark interested in the emotional life of Jesus? Well, my answer is, well, who's on the receiving end of Jesus' emotions more than Peter? If anybody understands him being mad or frustrated, there's that passage in Mark where Jesus comes down from the mountain and how much longer do I have to put up with you? He says. Every time I read that, I say, Jesus, that really hurts my feelings. Because I can imagine him looking at me and go, Mike, dude, how much longer do I have to put up with you? So, but you can go, Luke's interest in, Luke is Paul, he's a companion of Paul. What would you expect? What you expect is exactly what you get. You get someone who's traveling all the time. The story of Jesus in Luke is Jesus traveling. He's always on the road. 9 to 19 is just Jesus walking to Jerusalem for the last time. Well, I think that comes from Paul. He's interested in the Gentile mission. That comes from Paul, right? So he's interested in medical details. Well, he's a doctor. That makes sense. If he's a doctor, he's probably a slave because most doctors were slaves in the first century. Luke's very interested in marginalized people and slaves and women, people, Jesus turning the world upside down. So those are the kinds of things. And then lo and behold, you get to John. 92% unique. It's the voice of John is, and the vocabulary of John is very unique. So, and none of these things are complicated. This is not complicated. Most of these things I say, and people who are familiar with the Gospels, I'll go, yeah, oh yeah, okay, yeah, I get that. No, now I understand why.
Yeah,
why that. Well, I just saw this a couple of weeks ago. John is the only gospel that tells stories of Jesus and one other person, long stories of Jesus and one other person. And once you say that, you go, yeah, Nicodemus, Joseph of Arimathea, woman at the well, all these people that have, the man born blind, that's a whole chapter on one guy. And only John does that. Matthew, Mark, Luke, they do not do that. So that's an interesting uniqueness of John. Very simple, but interesting.
I think all those details really bring it out in a phenomenal way, and it humanizes him. And I think there's and I've been trying to figure this out. I feel like now we have gone to a place where we're focusing more on the humanization of Jesus because we're losing touch with our humanity. And looking at the humanization, I think that's why The Chosen has been such a hit.
I do too.
He does a great job of humanizing him.
I don't think, what I think's wrong is that American Christianity is basically Pauline. Now, there's nothing wrong with Paul. That's God's word and it's perfect. Don't get me wrong. But most Christians I know a lot more about Paul than they do about Jesus. That, radical Christ-centeredness that for me came out of the Jesus movement, came from reading books like Christ the Center by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was hung for being a Christian, right? He was murdered for being a Christian. That's just important to me. And so I think sort of helping people fall in love with the person of Jesus and being amazed by him or whatever, the different things that happen when you get close to him. And as opposed to, I hear so many sermons on, and again, there's nothing wrong with theology, but we are called to follow this remarkable individual and to know him. Even Paul says, I want to know Christ. So,
I find, as you were saying, the Pauline part, and I wonder, I think we're good with the rules, but we're not always great with knowing the Redeemer personally.
Yes.
And I was thinking of another book. I don't know if you've read Gentle and Lowly yet by Dane Ortland.
You mean this book?
Yeah. He's got 3 more out after that. He's got one through the Psalms. He's got a small I'm trying to think where I've got them. But I've got all the newest ones, but I do think that people love that book because it does bring us back to the heartbeat and rescues us from that Pauline. But even in the Pauline Christianity, I'm not even sure if how many Christians now even know Paul. When I think they make Paul almost they don't humanize Paul. You know, when I think of Paul, when he's talking about, I've been shipwrecked, I've been whipped, I've been hungry, I've been naked. And then he's like, and then I'm getting I got daily anxiety from these really messed up churches. I'm getting reports from Corinth. They're getting drunk at communion, and in Philippi,
He complains a lot.
Yeah, he does. He complains a lot. But I think it's always important that not just humanize, but we go back to the person of Jesus, because that's who it is.
Yes. Yeah, but I think you're right. Bill, I was talking about Bill earlier. Bill's specialty was life of Paul. He was writing a book called Paul, the Task Theologian, when he died, a book unfortunately that will never be finished. And his approach was that Paul is not a systematic theologian. He's a task theologian. There's always a task. There's a problem. There's some dilemma that the church is dealing with. And then Paul addresses that. Okay. Mm-hmm. And if you stop trying to harmonize everything and understand this is what's happening in Corinth, this is what's happening in Thessalonica, and Paul would do that. What's the life situation of each one of those letters? And then you do begin seeing the human side of Paul as really a pastor. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's this brilliant, and with his background in Judaism, he is absolutely brilliant. And so once again, don't let the people watching this think I'm anti-Paul in any way, but I just think I just want to be radically focused the way Paul was radically focused on the person of Jesus. That's what I need in my life.
I think that I agree. I think that's what we all need.
Yeah.
Because
I want to know everything I can know about him. Everything I can know. I want to know. And that's another thing The Chosen did. I watched The Chosen. I'm watching the way they're dressed and what they're eating. Jesus eats fish every day. That's part of his life. And some people would say, well, what does that matter? Well, in the end, it really doesn't make any difference, apart from the fact that I want to know everything about him that I can know.
Which is, what was he eating? What was he drinking?
What does he wear?
That's why I think Dallas does such a phenomenal job. And I told him this because he was having a hard time. When he came on the show, he had just got criticized. I can't remember what episode, but it was where Jesus is practicing the Sermon on the Mount. And people got really frustrated that Jesus would practice. And again, and I had some Christians tell me, I'm not going to watch it because it's not from Holy Scripture. I'm like, he never said it was.
Yeah.
And his point is to illustrate the humanity of what people were thinking. And I think sometimes we're so in love with the image of what we think he was, not the reality of who he is. And that's why I like you're talking about bringing out the voice of God in the Gospels. Now, going through that for a moment, when you studied through Matthew, what was the picture that you really found of Christ that you missed otherwise?
Well, Matthew is, and again, if you look at his background and who he is, it all makes sense. Okay. Matthew is a Jew who had become a tax collector. And what does that mean? That means he gets kicked out of the synagogue, right? He's no longer part of Jewish life. No one will give him food or let him in their house or anything like that. Okay. He is anathema. And so what is Matthew interested in? Matthew's interested in all these people that are getting kicked out of the synagogue. He's writing to a group of Christian Jews, and their life situation is they're being excluded from Judaism,
which is huge.
Oh, well,
huge. It's the whole social life. It's the center of everything.
So then what would you expect the major theme from someone who's writing? His major theme is, hey, you're not excluded. You're part of a kingdom. That's Matthew's major theme. You're part of a kingdom. And Jesus is the king. So when you take the life situation of his first readers, it begins to make sense that he's writing to people who are like him, who've been kicked out of the synagogue he got kicked out of the synagogue for being a tax collector, but they're being kicked out of Jewish life for following Jesus.
So what's the modern equivalent? What do we learn from that? I mean, we can feel the social dimensions, but today you're going to say that people are being kicked out of church for following Jesus? Well, let's hope not.
Well, in the first place, Jews are still banned for following Jesus.
Of course.
Significant numbers. So that's still operative. I mean, for us, what does that look like? Yeah, it means being excluded for having, for not towing the line or something. I don't know.
Or following the culture.
Yeah. I don't know. I've never thought I had to think about that. I'll do something different for a change and not talk I'll think about it first. How's that? What do you think about it?
This is a podcast, so you do need to talk.
No, I know.
I mean, okay, so Mark, 434 verses. We've got the shortest of the gospel immediately. He's always moving. Gentiles starts with the baptism of John, not with the birth of Jesus.
But the ministry of Jesus always begins with John in all the gospels.
Of course.
Always. Because, how do you prepare the way for Jesus? You make people aware that they're sinners and they need someone to redeem them. So,
But the emotional life of Jesus, you talked about that. Describe that. Bring that out for a bit, because I don't think that's something that we think about very often.
Well, here's a nerdy answer for you. In the Gospel of John, there are two adjectives that describe Jesus' emotions. Jesus is fairly unemotional in the Gospel of John. In Mark, I think there's 16 or 17. So he's angry. In Mark, the rich young ruler, Jesus looked at him and loved him. So there's this kind of emotional piece to it. And again, I attribute that to Peter being in the background. Yeah. So the emotional life of Jesus. In Luke, one of the major themes, if you look at the language, is amazement. Everyone's amazed. I call it the gospel of amazement. He exhausts the language of amazement. There are about four words that can be translated to be astonished or to be amazed. Luke uses all of them. And sometimes there'll be two. If you hear a verse that says, the people were astonished and amazed, that's Luke. That's his language. That's how he talks. Okay, but what does that mean? See, that's an interesting fact, but what does that mean? Well, what it means is, we know Luke wasn't an eyewitness, that he talked to eyewitnesses 30 years later after, the event. And so what that means is the people he's talking to consistently are still astonished by what they saw when they saw and heard Jesus. I think that's a pretty cool idea.
It is pretty cool.
Yeah. Luke. So Luke is very much interested in that aspect, and as well as other things, but he's interested in parables more than any of them. And you can compare and contrast the Gospels, but again, they're not disagreeing with each other. They're just giving a
different emphasis
image of it. Yeah, they don't disagree with each other. They're wonderfully integrated. Even I think sometimes when they don't know they're being integrated, they're wonderfully integrated.
Several years ago, I saw that there was a chronological Bible that came out, and I thought, oh, that'd be awesome. And I got a chronological Bible, and I asked a friend of mine who's a New Testament scholar, and he goes, ugh. And I said, what do you mean, ugh? And he's like, it kills the biblical theology.
Interesting.
And his point is that because each one is emphasizing, he's just reinforcing your point. Each one is emphasizing a different portion, and that when we take it out and we put them together, while it has some aspect of blessing for us to see that laid out, but he says, but each one has a different emphasis on what they're trying to focus on.
Right.
And we lose that. And I don't think we think in terms of biblical theology. We think in terms of systematic theology. And getting back to that biblical theology, which is really what you're calling people to do, but you're calling it the voice of the four gospels. That's the focus on it.
The voices of the gospels. Yeah.
The voices.
But you're talking about systematic theology. That's a very Greek. That's Greek thinking. Okay.
It is.
The writers of the New Testament, they write in Greek, but they think in Hebrew. And if you look at Judaism, even today, they don't do systematic theology. You talk to a rabbi, they don't talk about, oh, that's soteriology or that's missiology. That's Greek. That's thinking Greek. In Judaism, which is Jesus' world, they think in stories. Rabbis will tell you stories. That's what Jesus does. He tells parables and teaches that way. And again, there's nothing wrong with thinking in Greek. We're English people, so we tend to think in. We want to give names to things, right? So that's whatever. Like I said before, that's soteriology, that's missiology, that's whatever. And in Judaism, they think in verbs. Hebrew's a verbal language. So Jesus thinks in verbs. He doesn't think in nouns. which I think is another fascinating way of looking at how his mind works. So yeah, that's that's where I've been for the last 2 or 3 years.
And when do you hope to have that book released?
I have no idea. It's going to be at least 2 years. And this is the last book I'm writing, and I'm done. I'm going to spend the rest of my life talking and thinking about this, but I'm done with Bible. I've written 27 books. I think 27 is enough.
So you've written 27 books.
Yeah.
452 songs.
Yeah, 450 songs, rough. That's 35 albums. Wow. So yeah, I'm done.
You're done. So what are you going to do?
I'm going to teach Bible studies here locally where I live, down here at Fernvale Community Church or Brentwood Baptist Church. I teach there on Wednesday nights. Get involved more with the community, because I've been gone a lot, the last 35 years, 40 years.
So out of all the ministry that you've done and places that God has taken you, if you could have done one thing differently, what would it have been?
I don't have any big regrets. Like I would have done it differently. In an ideal world, I would have spent more time with my family, but that's that part of the call, right? I mean, Jesus, and when Jesus outlines the call, he says that's kind of part of it. You say goodbye to them. You don't sacrifice them, because I think if you're a good Christian, you're still a good father and good husband. But it's just been hard. It's been hard on my family. I've been gone as much. There were some years where I was gone more than I was home, but that wasn't a long period of time. And all but one of my kids have forgiven me for that. My wife has been fine with that. She understood.
Well, she didn't want to marry you to begin with, so that wasn't a big problem. Right. So what are your hobbies?
You're a good listener, Travis.
So, I mean, you've done all this stuff. Now you're farming, you're selling flowers, not planning on making music, planning on studying and teaching this stuff. Your heartbeat seems to be like it's always been, it's been being a student of the Bible. That's something that I wish more singers and artists were of.
Well, that's where the songs always came from. I got excited about an idea, and it sort of resonated as a song. Gloria Gaither, for a long time, people have asked me to come to these seminars where people teach people to write songs. And I go, I can't do that. How do you teach someone, to write a song? That makes, and so finally I didn't talk to her. We were emailing back and forth the other day. I have a lot of respect for Bill and Gloria Gaither. And she said, would you like to be a part of this? And I finally said, okay, this is what I can do. I can help people learn how to engage with Scripture and find those nuggets that are worth writing songs about. I can do that, but I can't teach somebody how to write a song. I don't know how to write a song. So that looks like that I talked myself into a gig with the Gloria Gaither, which is not too bad.
So, I mean, you just said that you didn't. I mean, were you ever trained as a musician?
No, but I grew up in Nashville, and I grew up playing. Everyone in my family was a performing musician. All of my friends were musicians. Music was just my world. But no, I never studied music.
Is your family? What brought them to Nashville from the beginning? Or was it just that Nashville grew up around them?
My dad was from Nashville. My dad was a doctor, but he played trombone in a big band jazz. So he was a Tommy Dorsey, Duke Ellington guy. My mother was a violinist in college. She toured with a string quartet in Texas. So she was a musician. My sister is a classical organist, and my brother plays bluegrass music. And then I was the youngest. So basically I grew up in this world where all this was happening. My dad's jazz band would practice in our basement every couple of weeks. And so I grew up listening to that horrible music. A lot of cigarette smoke and gin drinking involved, in big band music, not kind of the opposite of my world. But anyway, but then all my friends, my friends growing up were Earl Scruggs, the banjo player, Earl Scruggs. Mm-hmm. Well, his son, Steve, was one of my best friends growing up. And later on, his older son, Randy, got me in the music business. He's the first person I ever made music with was Randy Scruggs. So all my friends were musicians. You just couldn't get away from it. You couldn't get away from it.
So it's just it's what you've grown up in. You can't.
We didn't play, kickball after school. We played bluegrass, or we had a 50s band called Bubba and the Stingrays. We played 50s music or whatever. We always played music. Yeah.
What's your favorite music? Do you have one genre that
bluegrass.
you really go back? Bluegrass still?
Bluegrass is what, I'm most drawn to. I love bluegrass music.
How about authors? Who do you love to read?
That's really more my world than music. I mean, I was early on Bonhoeffer, and I actually got to be friends with Eberhard Bethke, who was Bonhoeffer's confessor.
Yeah,
he came to our to Western and spoke for a week, and I was his driver. I got to pick him up at the airport, and he's married to Bonhoeffer's niece, Renata. So that was huge for me. Bonhoeffer, Cost of Discipleship, and Christ the Center, those books were huge. John Stott's, Your Mind Matters, that was huge for me. That really changed my world. The Cost of Discipleship was the cure. And I'm not being anti-Southern Baptist, because the Southern Baptists are awesome. They do great work. But Cost of Discipleship was the cure for every sort of aspect of easy believism, or whatever it is I grew up with. So Bonhoeffer was huge for me. And then later on, when I started writing, I said the people I stole from the most are people like Frederick Buechner. Brennan Manning became a very close friend, but Brennan Manning's book was huge for me. Brennan was huge for me. Those kind of guys.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Were you ever a bit
steal ideas from? Those are the people that I'm drawn to. You're always looking for people who have done your homework for you. I teach that in my classes. You're always trying to find someone who's done your homework for you.
Well, because we really are just building on the foundation that other people have laid every which way we go.
Absolutely.
So out of all those authors, who has the most profound effect on you? Bonhoeffer?
It was clearly Bonhoeffer. In terms of language, Buechner. I mean, Buechner is dangerous because he writes so beautifully. He could say something that's not true and you'd believe it, but his language is just so beautiful. But Bonhoeffer is the guy who really changed my life, that God used to change my life. And his whole story, about being martyred and underground church during the war and that sort of thing. And there was a time when Bonhoeffer, I think Metaxas' book brought him back for a while to the sort of people's attentions, but he's a person that we should spend some time with. I know there was another book that slandered him and said some horrible things about him that weren't true.
Slandered who? Bonhoeffer or Metaxas?
Yeah, Bonhoeffer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
because I studied Bonhoeffer at seminary, and I think he's just so relevant to our modern culture, especially in the church, where I think we've got so caught up in all the different social issues that we've really lost the essence of the gospel in many ways. Yeah. And I'm always wondering, are we ever going to come back to this point where we are the confessing church in America?
Yeah.
I've wondered
when there's enough pressure. Yeah, we'll come back to that, because that's the only way you survive.
Yeah. And that type of radical fellowship, which is something that I think we've lost in our contemporary culture. I'm getting ready. I don't know if there's a book out there called Analog Church by Jay Kim, who is going to be a guest on the show. But basically he's saying that, his book dropped, I don't know, a few days after the pandemic started. But it's basically just calling people back to, we need real fellowship, real relationships to build with people in community that is largely lost today, even hospitality. We had as a guest on the show, Jason Georges, who wrote Ministering in Honor, Shame Cultures and the 3D Gospel. And he's doing a PhD in hospitality at the University of Durham. And we don't know anything about hospitality in our culture today. That's what I love about what you're doing, in that you're rediscovering some of these things that you've seen within scripture, hearing the voice of these individuals, what they valued, what they cared for.
Well, and you were talking earlier about traveling. You learn about hospitality by traveling. Go to China, right? We're a Christian. I had have a picture over here someplace. A little old lady wanted me to go home with her. Just you can come and stay at my house. Northern Ireland, when I used to spend a lot of time in Northern Ireland, and I can remember people staying in people's homes, and young married couple. We only had one bed in the house, and they slept on the couch, and I slept in their bed, and I was pleading with tears in my eyes, please let me sleep on the couch. And they said, here, their response, I love this response, very Irish. They said, you'll rob us of the blessing if you do that. And in Scotland one time, staying with a family, the feast that they laid for us was a little baked potato and one leaf of lettuce, because that's all they had. That's hospitality. I think you only learn it you don't learn it by reading about it so much. You learn about it when people sacrifice to, you sleep in their bed and they sleep on the couch. You go, oh, okay, I get it. I mean, it's the incarnation, right? That's right. Basically, Jesus slept on the couch and we sleep in the bed.
I had an Indian man come to our home, and we'd given him a bed, and he wouldn't sleep on it himself. We were trying to be hospitable and give him this. He slept on the floor because that's what he was used to sleeping on.
Yeah, okay.
But it still was so difficult. Like, I was pleading with him then to sleep in the bed, but for him, he also didn't feel worthy.
Wow.
And I thought, you're the worthy guy here, not me. I mean, he was coming from a place where he and his wife were taking care of 10 orphans, and they would bike every kilometer. Actually, didn't even bike. They had to walk so many kilometers just to get food every day. And their home had a concrete floor, but it had no toilet, and it had the corrugated metal, and it didn't go all the way to the floor. So they would pray at night that the scorpions and snakes didn't get in. And he said we would come home after going to the market, and they had to walk so many kilometers, right? And he'd say, we had to get home before sunset so the tigers wouldn't get us. And I was like, back up. Did you just say tigers? Like, it's just such a different world. So much closer to the world of the New Testament.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, if I won't tell this on myself, but I do know there was one Christian artist who stormed out of a hotel because the towels weren't thick enough.
That's sad. I mean, I laugh, but that's sad.
Well, that same artist later got involved in missions, and it totally changed his life. He totally changed his life. But at one point, I know people that complain about stuff like that.
So what are you teaching right now at church? You said you're teaching this stuff on Wednesday night, but what are you teaching specifically right now?
Okay, well, I just finished at Brentwood Baptist is where I've been teaching on Wednesday nights. I just did a series they have a really cool group they call their TNT group. They're what do you call them? They're on staff. They're like being discipled there. It begins with a C. I can't think of the word, but anyway.
Catechumen? Is it a catechumen?
No. They're interns.
That's not a C. That's not a C.
Yeah. Welcome to the 64-year-old brain. But anyway, so I just finished that class up, and now I'm starting this Wednesday night with the singles class, and we're going to do Luke. So we're just going to work through the Gospel of Luke.
How long does that take you?
Well, it's just however long they give me. I think they've given me like 5 weeks, so we won't go chapter by chapter. We'll just do big sections. I'll do one session just introducing and giving them the categories, and then they got to read the whole gospel the next couple of days, and then we'll spend 4 more weeks, I think, looking at big blocks that illustrate kind of those major themes.
Okay. And when you teach these courses, do you ever find yourself pretty intimidated at some of the people that have gone before you? I mean, Brentwood Baptist is a big church. There's been a lot of names that have gone through there. Yeah. Do you find yourself going, all right, I got to get this right. I got to do this well.
I don't know. Every now and then when someone shows up in a class and they're a PhD from Vanderbilt in theology or something, that's pretty intimidating. But the people who would come to my class in the first place, aren't in general. They tend to be nice people, right? Mean people don't tend to come to my class anyway.
I asked a pastor friend of mine, he pastors up in Northern Illinois, and he said D.A. Carson walked into the service,
yeah.
and he said, I said, were you nervous? He goes, no, because Jesus was there.
Yeah. I did a concert one time, and I sat down. I looked at the front row, and D.A. Carson sitting there, and that was pretty intimidating. I didn't talk much between songs. Because I mean, here's a sidebar. This is something new I've learned about the academic world. I showed you all these notebooks that I have, a pile of notebooks, and these are just all articles.
The D.A. Carson wrote.
Well, some of them. Here's Jewish studies. Here's the language and multi Jesus. How many languages Jesus speaks? I've 50 articles on that. Anyway, but here's what I'm learning, Travis. You're trying to learn and you're trying to figure things out, and then you start reading enough articles, and they all disagree with each other.
Oh yeah,
and that drives me nuts. People that are really smart, right? People that are smarter than you and me, they can't find a consensus on some of these basic things, and that's frustrating for me. But that's how you get a PhD, right? You write a thesis about how everybody else is wrong about this, and you figured something new out. But and so it makes me that much more grateful to people like William Lane or George Guthrie or D.A. Carson, who see scholarship as something to serve the church with. That's how they wash feet. So, and there are a lot of New Testament scholars or biblical scholars out there like that. But I'm just kind of tired of people that are out to disagree and make other people look foolish.
Well, not just to make them look foolish, but they have that pressure that they have to publish and they have to come up with something new.
Sure.
That's what drives me nuts about academics and why I didn't go into academics, because I feel like you're not. Are you really serving the people of God?
Yeah.
Or are you just trying to do something different to get noticed?
Yeah.
Because
of course, if the majority is wrong about some issue, and they frequently are, maybe you're the guy who takes the heat to say, here's what the Bible really says, and let me say it in a fresh way or something like that. But
I mean,
I had originally wanted to be part of that world, and I can see now why God didn't let me, because I wouldn't have been very good in that world.
I don't know.
Much.
But I mean, you've got enough writings and research that shows you're a researcher at heart. Your undergraduate degree is in
what I translate stuff across. That's my job. I digest all of this stuff and take what is, I hope, is true, and I translate it across. I don't talk down to people. I talk across to people. So I'm very glad for that. I mean, I did that in songs, same sort of thing. I don't have very many new ideas. I'm making hay with other people's ideas.
Well, isn't that the way that any pastor hopefully is?
Well, I think it is. And Bill, it's so funny when Bill would preach, this is back in the day, and I would write, whatever the theme was, the Song Emmanuel. Okay, the Song Emmanuel I wrote. That came from the sermon he preached at our wedding. And the sermon was, if God is with you in the context of marriage, who could ever be against you? So it was this encouraging word. Well, I wrote a song about that later on. And the song comes out, and I get this phone call from Bill, and Bill's all animated. And he said, "Oh, I just heard your new song on the radio." He goes, "Michael, what a wonderful use of scripture you have." So he had forgotten this sermon. And I said, "Bill, that was a sermon you preached when Susan and I got married." And on the other end of the phone, I hear, "Oh, he's laughing." He said, "I do think it was particularly fine." I did think it was particularly fine.
Didn't you get married at Christmas, right around there?
December 14th. Yep.
So the church was already decorated and everything?
There it is.
Wow.
There we are.
Have you always had a beard?
Bill.
Wow.
That's Bill. Yeah. From the moment I was hormonally capable of doing it. Do you want to cover up as much of this space as you can?
There's a website out there called Bearded Gospel Men. Have you ever seen that?
No, sound like a good one.
Oh, it's so nice. It's funny. It has pictures from like the 1800s of guys, and it just makes a joke. Like it has like pictures of different Bible characters, and it says, "And you go without a beard, way to be like Jesus." You know, it's
Well, I mean, let's face it. With very few exceptions, and I mean, like probably less than 2%. Most men need to cover up as much of their face.
That's very, very true. Which is why I did that.
I shaved off my beard one time years ago. My daughter, who's like in her 27 or 8 years old now, she burst into tears, and it was like a monster had walked in the room.
Did she recognize you?
She knew it was me, but she thought something horrible had happened. I've been in some kind of horrible accident or chemical. So there's a reason that God designed us this way.
It's true. When did you lose your hair? How old were you?
I was talking with my wife about that the other day, because I don't really remember. I see pictures of myself and it going. I think right around when we started having kids, it started falling out. But the odd thing is, I don't ever remember it bothering me. I was never bothered.
Huh.
My father was bald, and it never bothered him. He kind of joked about it, and it just wasn't an issue. And I don't think it ever bothered me.
Well, I was looking at when I was prepping for this, I came across some of your earliest albums from 81, 82, and I'm like, I didn't even recognize you.
Yeah.
Because you have hair in the middle of all those.
I can't find it. I've got a picture around here somewhere. I look like a hippie, but just one less thing to have to worry about.
Well, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I want to thank you for coming on the show. And of course, people can go and hear your podcast. Tell us a bit about what you've been doing and how other people can follow along with what is your teaching and writing.
Well, I think it's called In the Studio. It's had 2 or 3 different names, but just go to one of those podcast things and look for my name. You'll find it. I think it's called In the Studio. In fact, I've got to do one tomorrow, I think. Anyway, Joe Carlson Moody is the person that does all that. And we have some pretty cool guests, I must say. I think it's called In the Studio. Do you want me to look that up?
I think it is called In the Studio. It is In the Studio with Michael Card. It's so funny to me that you don't even know your podcast name.
Well, let me see. Well, it's had 2 or 3 different names, and we didn't do it, and then it started up again. But In the Studio. Another quick sidebar. My grandfather, who I revere, who I'll show you his picture. Yeah. That's him on the wall.
Oh, that's great.
That's my grandfather Brown. I've got a newspaper clipping, and this guy was interviewing him and asking him how old he was, and he didn't know. He had to. There's this description of him taking a piece of paper and calculating how old he was, and I'm starting to get like that. So Einstein was like that. There was only certain things that he put in his brain, so it's like being like Einstein. It's not that you're stupid and senile. It's not that.
Did you ever see? Okay, you want to do a sidebar? Did you ever see Sherlock, the TV show Sherlock, the British one?
Yeah.
Where he says he goes, "Do you really not know that the sun goes around? I mean, the Earth goes around the sun." He's like, "What does it matter?
What difference would that make?"
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's in the original Conan
Sherlock
Doyle.
Holmes.
They got that from the original one. Yeah. No, and Sherlock Holmes would only put stuff in his brain that he thought he could use. So I guess I get that, but our conversation is degenerating right now. So
it is. It is. We got to get going.
We were talking about baldness and then Sherlock Holmes. So it's probably
we might be editing. We might do a little bit of editing in the middle of all this. But again, I want to thank you for coming on the show. It was a delight to have you on Apollos Watered.
Thanks, Travis.